This is Life Lessons Lounge, and I am Igina Gerazi. Here, we explore diverse life stories and the wisdom they hold. Let's delve into the stories that shape us, teach us, and connect us all. Today, I have a special guest in the podcast, and the special guest is Sam Allen. Anyone who has been following me, we started with Sam, our own podcast initially, which was Untaming Femininity and then Untaming Leadership. And so I've known Sam for quite some time, and we have also delivered leadership programs together, and we've done a lot of things together. But today the focus is on her. And Sam is a Tantra guide, creative leadership coach, and poet and author of The Wild Feminine Spirit. Sam specializes in helping you to connect to your pleasure, to prioritize it, and to experience pleasure in new and heightened ways. We talked about grief. We talked about the lessons passed down by Sam's dad to then talk about Tantra. What is a Tantric massage? How do you feel safe? And all the stages of the Tantric massage. What is pleasure and also creativity? To finish this episode with Sam reading one of her poems. I wish you really enjoy this episode because there is so much depth and lightness at the same time. And thanks again for tuning in and subscribing to this channel. Thank you. I'm so grateful that you're here and that you're my guest and that we get to share your story. And for the listeners and watchers and everyone to get to hear who you are and how amazing Sam is with all what makes her her. So I'm really, really thankful and grateful that you're here.
Thanks, McGenna. I feel really grateful to be here. And I have to say that I feel quite relaxed right now. And it's mainly because of the atmosphere that you create around you. So, yeah, thank you for having me. I know we've had many a conversation together, and yet somehow this one does feel different. You know, I'm on the other side and yeah, just feeling good hands and ready to explore.
Yes, exactly. Because we have such a history together, right? And we have had our own first podcast, the Untaming Femininity. And then it went into Untaming Leadership, right? And how many seasons did we do?
Wow, I don't know, maybe something like 6 seasons. We were nearly on 100 episodes, weren't we?
Oh my God. Yeah, it's crazy.
I
But
know.
that actually is such a celebration as well of the journey together of who we are, how we've grown through it. And I'm so grateful that we got to do that together.
Me too. And when I look back at that time, I mean, it was over a couple of years, wasn't it? But we both grew enormously, I think, especially through the podcast, because there we were exploring themes, speaking to guests, learning about podcasting, learning about life. And so, even some of my life lessons, I have to say, have come through that process with you in those years. So I'm also really grateful for that.
Yeah. And now we both have a podcast.
We do, yes.
And yours is called Heartgasms.
Of course. Do you know, funnily enough, McGenna, that I probably shared with you, but the idea for that podcast was so instantaneous. I was lying in bed one night and suddenly it felt almost like my heart was bursting out of my chest in that tantric way. And I had a few words, but Heartgasms was the one that was just staying. And, I don't know if you've ever had one of those moments, but where you really cannot go back to sleep unless you get it down, on pen and paper. And so I did. And then, of course, there were ideas coming. And 2 hours later, I had the kind of concept for the podcast, and it was born out of that time. So, yeah, it's funny how these small little seeds, come at the least expected of times and then turn into big projects.
Sometimes these seeds come, but we don't usually take the time, right?
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that you caught it and then you turned it into one of actually the top podcasts in Switzerland now, right?
I mean, I had an email, when I first launched it to say that, yes, it was in the top, I don't know what percent of the Swiss podcast underneath the category of spirituality, which was, really special. And mainly because it had come from this very innocent idea that just kind of burst out of my chest. And I think always the best ideas are those, aren't they? We don't necessarily understand them fully, but they've come from somewhere and they're just kind of begging for us to express them.
Yes, and you did it. You're doing it.
Thank
I'm so
you. Thank
proud of
you.
you.
Yeah. Do you know what, McGenna? As you say that, I can't help but think about my dad, and he's somebody that I would love to share wisdom about in this conversation today, because he, just as you were cheerleading me there, he was such a huge cheerleader. And not only was he a huge cheerleader, but he would always come out with these sayings. And I guess they were sayings that had been handed to him from his dad and his grandfather and stuff like that. But when I think about many of my life lessons, they almost revolve around these very simple proverbs or sayings or pieces of age old advice that my dad would transmit to me. And at the time when I heard them, they wouldn't necessarily sink in, right? When I was a kid and I would hear, I don't know, one of his favorites was, for example, patience is a virtue. And I'd be like,
Mm.
patience! You can imagine me, eccentric, child running around the place. But now as an adult, these things come back to me, and they get me in the heart, because I realize the gravitas of them. I realize the depth of those very simple words.
Mm. And how has this seemingly simple statement, how has it shaped your life now?
Yeah, I love that question. So, for example, that patience is a virtue. I really apply that a lot to people. And that's not to say that I show people immediate patience like that. No, I don't. There are times when I can be exceptionally impatient, But what I do have in me is, and I'm smiling at a picture of my dad I'm looking at as I
Oh, that's
say,
beautiful.
there it is.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Oh, brings a kind of smiley tear to my heart. But what I've learned to do in embodying more, I guess, that saying is to be kind and forgiving about idiosyncrasies, about imperfections, about times when, somebody does something and it's not like perhaps that nice or that, ideal towards me or somebody else. Of course, I'm going to have some sort of reaction at the time. Yes, I'm human, but I have this feeling of like humanity and forgiveness in the long term around things. So for me, that patience as a virtue was around, look in the mirror. You're not so perfect yourself. Sometimes you're asking stuff of people that may be difficult for them to show towards you. And so please do the same. It's like that knowingness that we're all in the same boat, basically, trying to
Mm.
make the best of this thing called life, sometimes getting it right, sometimes getting it wrong. So the patience part has really impacted my forgiveness and my compassion towards my loved ones, and also people that I don't love that much.
That's so beautiful, Sam.
Mm.
Yeah. And you were talking about your dad, and I know that he has been such a strong, influential pillar in your life and a
Yeah,
strong foundation of who you are. So, can you tell me a little bit about him?
I'd love to. So my dad, where to start? He was my hero. He was a kind, gentle, good-natured, good-humoured man, loved by everyone who came across him, and his intention. Also human, he had his ways as well. Quite old-fashioned, a gentleman, definitely. And yeah, whenever obviously sometimes we look back with rose-tinted glasses. I lost my dad, coming up for 9 years this December. And still, when I look back over the whole course of my life with my dad in it, I remember his consideration. I remember his sensitivity. I remember his making me feel beautiful when I was a 16-year-old prom dressed, disgusting prom dressed teenager, spot, skinny, probably not looking attractive in the slightest, but there was dad making me feel like I looked like $1 million. So he had this way of making me feel like a beautiful young lady, even though I was probably quite an ugly duckling at the time. So yeah, my dad was a very special soul. I feel extremely privileged to have been raised by a man with such strong values and such a huge heart, and that sort of person that can really light the room up, and at the same time doesn't need to do that by being loud or bragging or brash or any of those things, but just by being real and himself. In fact, he was actually quite a soft-spoken man. He was a good listener, a very good listener. So he would be probably one that would be holding the space more and, keeping the harmony of the group and stuff like that. And so, yeah, he's been a massive influence on my life. And I know that the moments when I start to be critical towards myself or have that, saboteur voice, as we say in coaching, going in my ear, it's always my dad's voice that I've internalized that helps me to come back into a balance and back into a more self-loving relationship with me. So I'm really eternally grateful for all of his wisdom and influence and legacy. And I lost him, as you know, to pancreatic cancer. It was very sudden, really. It was from one day to the next. He was having these stomach aches. I had that dreaded phone call here in Switzerland to say that he'd have to go for tests. And then, we got the diagnosis. Felt like my world was collapsing. We had him for 18 months after his diagnosis, which is actually a long time, as anybody watching will know if they've had a relative that's suffered from pancreatic cancer. So thank God for that, because we had some wonderful times together. And it was a huge, pivotal, soul-crushing, devastating moment when I lost my dad. And at the same time, the beginning of a beautiful journey into a different relationship with myself and with life. So heaps of gratitude for all of it.
Yeah, I'm sorry you had to go through that, and not knowing your dad. I mean, knowing your dad only through you, right? And knowing you really well. I think you're so much living his legacy. Like when I heard you describe your dad, it felt like you were talking about yourself as
You're going to
well.
get me crying. Do you realize this? It touches me because if I can be in any small way like my dad, then, it's a life worth living. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. You see, you got the tears going, McKenna.
Yeah. And how did you deal with the grief?
Yeah. I love that question. My gosh. Yeah, I know you've experienced grief too, so I know you know what that feeling is. I dealt with it. How do I want to say this? I dealt with it immediately. That's the first word that I want to use. And for this, thank God, for all of I'm a highly sensitive person and I feel things, as you know, on steroids. And so there's lots of positives and also challenges with this. In the case of grief, I couldn't shelve it or numb it or disassociate from it. I wasn't capable of doing that. It was just so in my body and so in my space that I had to deal with it immediately. And that's what I'm thankful for, because I didn't put grief on hold, which I know so many people do, either because they feel they have to, or they really do have to, because they've got so many things that are, coming towards them. They cannot even go to the feelings. So I wasn't in that place. And so, I remember coming back to Switzerland after Dad's funeral, which is when the real grieving started, because I feel like that's quite a milestone. Again, I think if you're listening and you've been through grief, you're going through grief, you'll know that that's something you just kind of need to do. And then somehow the outpouring starts. And wow, I mean, lots of wailing. It was a very, how do I want to describe this? It was noisy in my case, I would be lying in bed and wailing like a baby, really, like I felt like a child. It was just such a pure, painful, primitive feeling for me. And so I really did cry it out. And this was over quite a period of time, several months, when I had to really be like that, especially in the evenings. And that when the daylight came, it sheds a bit of light on the situation. You start to go about your day and, you do other stuff and life throws other stuff at you. But yeah, I really did use sound and my body to move the grief through. And of course, it wasn't just pure sadness. There was also anxiety. As you know, I've told you this story many a time, so I don't want to bore you with it again. But I found poetry through grief, because when I was walking to work one day after Dad's funeral, the anxiety was just so in my face. And I thought, how am I going to go and teach teenagers? I was a teacher at the time. How do I get up there in front of 20 kids that really don't care what's happening in my life right now? when I feel like this. So I had grief, I had anxiety, I had sadness, I had confusion. Just, it was like almost like an out of body experience at times, that. And so, I had this message to write stuff down. So another part of dealing with my grief was to let it come through in words. And so I would write furiously into my phone, and I would write, several poems a day, just for me at that stage. It was really literally like a diary, but it happened to come out in poetic form. And so, yeah, really just, I let myself be a mess. Not when I was teaching, obviously, I had to kind of hold it in then, but in and around everything that I had to do to function, I let the mess come through. I allowed my vulnerability to be there. I told people. I also made sure I kept up my physical fitness and got outside in nature, which is a big healer for me. But yeah, I didn't run away from the grief. I couldn't. I'm somebody that's wired to confront my experiences. And so this was super tough, obviously, because the experience of grief is not a pretty one. And yet I leaned into it and I let it run its course through me. And I say that almost, it sounds, I hear myself saying it like, it's finished. It hasn't finished. It never finishes. But certainly that intense, traumatic, everyday, like life-changing feeling is obviously much different these days. Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen once one of these drawings that it said, like grief remains the same, but it's us that we grow bigger around it. Right? That we create more space around the grief to handle it, to deal with it. Yeah, to accept it, to know that it's present there. Right.
Yeah, I
So
love that. Yeah, I can really relate to that saying, actually, because yeah, there are certain things, like if sometimes something comes on the television, it might be like a really kind of soft, emotionally intelligent father and his daughter, and immediately I can like feel like almost like it was the day when I lost him, the sadness. And yet still, just as you were saying, there's so much more spaciousness around it these days. So I'm not haunted by my grief. I'm not, obsessed by my grief or anything like that. And I do thank the fact that I went through the intense phase immediately for that. And so, yes, there are moments when, waves when they come back, and I feel it all over again, especially as there were other losses during that time in my life. And I've had other major losses, not just life losses, but other losses since then. Things can trigger it again, but they trigger it and I'm with it differently. And that's what I understand when you share that. Like we're actually, the grief's still there, but we're a little differently in and around it.
did you have to go through this 5 stages of grief?
Huh. Do you know what, McGenna? There's a lot, obviously, in the stages of grief, and I get that the people that researched this did their homework, and
Yeah.
I do believe there is, from the shock to disbelief to, I can't remember what the other phases even are, but
Denial.
we do move through those stages. But I remember at the time thinking, my gosh, really? So I do these 5 stages, and then I've ticked off grief, and I can do the next thing, I mean, for me, I remember even writing a poem about that, actually. It's, yes, there are possibly 5 different experiences and more that you can have in grief. And for me, they can repeat themselves whenever in any sequence. So I believe that, I went through and still go through some of those. And I believe that they come back in slightly different ways, and that it's not quite as, fixed a package as the 5 stages.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I completely relate to that as well. Well, I did when my dad passed away, that's 20 years ago now. I did have the shock and the denial for a very long time because he
Mm.
was not living with me in Albania at that time. And then, it was all the time this thing of, oh, if my dad is just one phone call away, and like if I call, he will just reply. And then every time there was that kind of, I had to confront that denial that, hey, no,
Yeah.
actually, he's
Yeah.
not, which was really, really tough.
I can really imagine that. I get, on birthdays and stuff. I think I said to you when we saw each other recently that that's the thing. I just want to phone up my dad, or for my dad to phone and ask me about my birthday. Even now I'm 48 years old, and it's those things that can bring up just those feelings that you're describing there. like unfairness, injustice, all sorts of different things that maybe aren't traditionally in those 5 phases, but that make up what grief can be. It's very complex. And in another way, it's very simple. you
Mm.
know, it's like we have many different complex emotions around grief. What does it boil down to? Somebody who we dearly loved isn't with us anymore, and it hurts.
Yeah.
And it's always going to hurt somehow. But it's not doom and gloom, because when we move through the grief, we are opening up light and space inside of ourselves. We do grow. I felt a physical sense of I'm bursting into something bigger than I was before here. I have more capacity to love. I have more capacity to understand. I appreciate life more, you
Mm.
know. I remember my dad when he was in his last stages just a couple of weeks before he passed, and we were visiting back in the UK, and he was like a skeleton. And I don't know how he got out to walk, but he insisted, because he knew also that I like to get my fresh air. He insisted we'd go for this little walk together. So there we were, my dad, my brother, Andy, my partner, and I, out for this walk. And he just stops at one point, and it's a cold day, and he just goes, oh, lovely fresh air. And it's such a simple, basic thing, right? But when you're just about to lose your life, which he knew he was going to, and you can still get yourself outside and appreciate that gift of breathing in air, I cannot tell you how humbling it is to be around somebody that's still in appreciation when they're about to go, you know?
That actually
That,
touches me because we forget sometimes like the simple joys of life, and also what we have that we need to be grateful for, like
yeah.
really that gratitude of what we already have. We so take it for granted, like even that breath.
Mm.
Yeah, that breath, that is, it's just so important.
It totally is. I remember also my dad, when we were younger, we didn't have an awful lot of money in my family, fairly working class family. We were living in a fairly middle class area, and my parents really fought hard for us to be able to stay there, but we didn't, have so much money. And so we'd have our summer holidays in like holiday camps in the UK. Don't know if you've ever heard of Butlins. It's
No.
a No, it's a holiday camp. But anyway, dad would give us like pennies and 10p's to go for the slot machines, the arcades, and we'd while away our hours and putting money in these slot machines. And for us this was just great. And I remember another one of his sayings would be, well, you can't take it away with you. And this also stayed, building on what you were saying around the life is now. It's like, yes, have ambitions, yes, have goals and dreams, and yes, this stuff is precious too. And don't say for that rainy day, this is the rainy day, you know? And so, again, that was another simple but powerful message coming from, my family, my dad, who never really had loads of money, but was just encouraging us to enjoy it whilst it was there. Not be frivolous, not be, excessive, but actually just, enjoy it whilst you can.
That's beautiful. I'm laughing because dare I say that to my mom? The thing, like how at least my mom, how they were raised, like always saving for those days to feel safe so that they can predict always for that rainy day. And I think I have her voice in my head, like you need to save. You never know, life can be very unpredictable. So yeah.
And that was obviously coming from a very good place too, right?
Yeah, of course, of course, of course.
Yeah.
So coming back a little bit to your dad and also the lessons that he has taught you how to live life, because you
Mm.
had some very nice sayings, and I know two of them now, right? So, yeah, the patience and the living now and gratitude. So, what
Mm.
else was there?
Yeah, so another phrase that my dad loved to say, and this one is slightly different, it has a different energy when I remember it, is have the courage of your convictions.
Hmm. What does it mean to you?
This means if you really believe in something, bloody well stand up for yourself and that.
Yes.
And what it doesn't mean is it's my way or the highway, or my
Mm.
opinion's right and your opinion's wrong. No. What it means to me is well, actually, even when I hear the word conviction, it's a heart knowing. So if I believe in my heart something to be really true, and I have that urgent, persistent, strong calling in my heart about something, about me or somebody else or a situation, then I'm going to have the courage to own that, to name it, to share it, to stand up for it. And for me, this is a little bit about having backbone.
Mm.
It's about knowing when something really matters and feels true, and having, the strength of character to own that.
Mm.
Um, and very, very different sort of energy from how I've described my dad with the other stuff. I think it's not quite so gentle. And dad did have a very strong sense of justice and what's the right thing to do here. And so that comes through for me. And of course, a lot about my personal journey into being fully expressed sensually, sexually, all the rest of it. And sometimes I've thought to myself, my gosh, in my life I'm living now as a leadership coach and Tantra guide, what would dad think of that? Because my dad was quite a conservative character. And so then when I dig deeper, what I hear is that phrase, love, have the courage of your convictions. So I'm not sure he would have got this. I'm not sure he would have related to it, but he would have known that this is something that my heart has as a quest and is true and right for me. And so he would have fully supported me in that. So
I believe
this,
so too. I believe
yeah,
so.
yeah.
And and yes, you mentioned Tantra. And what I'm curious about is how your life has changed when that you have opened up to this part.
Wow. McGenna, are you sure you want to ask me that question? Because this is only
Absolutely.
an hour-long session, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm going to try and attempt what we coaches call bottom lining, which, if you're watching, is basically trying to say things in a little shorter way than, the long, rambling narrative.
I
So,
believe you can, Sam.
oh my gosh, you have faith. So, how has it changed my life? Listen, wind back 10 years ago,
Hmm.
I was living a life in which I was maybe 30% expressed, going through the routine, doing my working days. You can just hear from my voice. It was, I was walking through life, but I wasn't fully there. And now I'm going to fast forward to the present moment. Now, not every single day of my life is bright and peachy and sunny, I have my highs and my lows. What I can say, though, is that the aliveness that I experience on the day to day is off the scale compared to that former version of me 10 years ago. So my personal journey into, firstly, having Tantra find me on that one day in the hotel in Barcelona when I had the choice between a Tantra massage and a full body classic massage. And I took the plunge and I had the Tantra massage. And that knowing that, my gosh, this does this for my energy. I need to do this now. So there was definitely a moment of have the courage of your convictions, because I had it. I had a bodily conviction that this was me. And then going through, 2-3 years of just receiving, really feeling into my sensuality, into my joy, into my pleasure, into a deeper sense of groundedness in my body. And then knowing at some point in that journey, I have so much to give others, and in accompanying them towards their greater expression and discovery of their sensuality, their recovery of their sexual, sensual, joyful, ecstatic selves. And so then, training, becoming a certified professional Tantra masseuse, taking women on the pleasure journeys that I do. These are coaching journeys, group coaching journeys for women in which they get to really experience their pleasure in new and heightened ways. I mean, I can hardly recognize that person that I just pictured 10 years ago. And then, where I'm at now. And as I say, I still have things I'm working through, and, you know, parts of my emotional life and my personal life that are not resolved or perfect or anything. I have my pain. I feel my pain even more than ever because I know how to feel my pleasure full on. So life is colourful. Life is colourful and rich and moving. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And for anyone who doesn't know what Tantra is, how would you describe it?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is to differentiate between Tantra and Tantra massage, because Tantra is an ancient Indian spiritual doctrine and practice. And Tantra massage is much younger than that. It originates in the 1990s in Berlin, Germany. And it's obviously hugely inspired by Tantra, but it's basically a holistic massage that encourages the activation of the Kundalini energy, which is located in the base of the spine. And the process of the massage helps to move this activated energy in and around the body so that it nourishes, enlivens, and revitalizes you. Some people find sessions deeply relaxing and wonder why they didn't do it many years ago. Some people find that they actually rediscover what arouses them, what excites them, what teases them, what pleases them, all this kind of stuff. And each session is very different. But it isn't just a physical thing. The impact of a Tantra massage, a good Tantra massage, especially if you have a journey of massages in succession, is that you start to feel more alive. You start to feel more dynamic. You start to feel more grounded. There's a confidence that comes through. This isn't like, hey, look at me type confidence. It's more, wow, there's all this energy in me and I can express it, you know? And yeah, there's a certain cracking open that happens. I personally found, both on my own journey and also accompanying clients on their journeys, that it is a daring step to go there and to have your first massage and stuff. But you quickly realize, my gosh, all this bullshit I was carrying around with me. And now just from one experience, it begins to drop off. And the layers and the pretense and the mannerisms and all this stuff, at least in my case, you know, I can't speak for everybody. Everybody's a little bit different, but they start to fade away. And I became closer to my truth, less able to look myself in the mirror and tell myself any lies, less able to tell anyone around me any lies, you know, just, yeah, more of me, more authenticity, more realness, less pleasing. That's been a massive part. And I know this also from clients, particularly women. You know, we women, as we know, Magena, I know you know, and have done loads of important work around this, but we're often being the good girl and, you know, feeling like we've grown up basing our identity on giving to others and providing for others. You know, I exist because I do that for somebody else. And so Tantra can help you actually get back in your own lane and realize, hey, I'm allowed to enjoy myself. I am allowed to take time to do that. I can luxuriate in my essence. I can put myself first, which of course is not selfishness. That's the thing we're often getting confused around. Selfishness is, I don't care about you. You know, you don't matter. Self first is, I'm going to meet my needs so that I can give to you and to other people in my life. So yeah, it's all been a massive awakening into the permission that I have to own, enjoy, and experience my pleasure inside of my beautiful, imperfect human body.
Amen to that. That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
And it's really what I want for other women, you know, too.
Yeah. Sam, have you encountered a lot of people that are judgmental towards it or hesitant to even try, or anyone? Because I think, since you also said this is quite a newly established practice, so I assume that there is still a lot of judgment because people don't know exactly what it is. How do you handle when you experience that?
Yeah, definitely there are a mixture of reactions from people. Most people that know me, that I talk to about it, they're just super curious. They may be like super curious in a slightly embarrassed way, but they kind of want to know more. So very few people that I know personally that I speak to this about over time judge it. They might to start with, but they usually start to, I think it's because they see what it's done for me. And so I think the dots get connected and they think, oh, okay, they must be doing something right with this if that's what she's getting from it, you know? However, of course, because we're working with sexual energy, Kundalini is our life force. In Tantra, our life force, our sexual energy is the same thing as our life energy. So we don't make any separation. So we are deliberately working with the sexual sensual energy. And because the massage is holistic and it involves the whole of the body, including breasts, genitals, if you wish, everything is completely consent-based. But of course, for people that don't have any experience in this field, that can feel super weird and can bring in judgments. And depending also on religious belief and upbringing and stuff, you know, some people might even think it might be wrong or something like that, you know, if they haven't yet experienced it. So these things can crop up. And certainly I'm not here to try and convince people that they should have a tantra massage if it absolutely fundamentally goes against some principles that they have. All I would say, though, is that I think every single person that I've come across that has allowed themselves to have the actual experience and to get over the head stuff very quickly melts into the beautiful, pure, innocent gifts of what loving touch is in a holistic way. So most of those kind of like surface level judgments or fears or confusions or stuff, you know, it dissipates when people have actually had the experience of it. And I know that from myself when I had my very first Tantra massage here in Basel, gosh, I was so nervous. Like my skin was like all blotchy and I was like, oh, like, do I have to have my shower and get changed now? And like, you know, super nervous. And as soon as I laid down, I maybe had 10, 15 minutes of being in my head thinking, this is kind of weird. I've never had a massage where I'm touched all over. I don't know this person, you know, all this stuff. Very, very quickly, I was so connected with my own self that these things, these layers, they just melted away. Yeah. And so for me, the process was quite quick, I suppose. Some people might take a bit longer to get their heads around it, depending on, as I say, their upbringings and stuff. And what I would say is, if you're curious, ask some questions first. If you're listening to this and Tantra massage has come onto your radar and it's made you think, you know, I'm a bit curious, but I'm also like judging it and a bit pushing it away, you don't need to just book a massage tomorrow. Feel free to reach out, by the way, or, you know, speak to a practitioner. Any good practitioner will spare you some time just to, you know, listen to you and hear what your wishes, thoughts, fears, expectations would be around the experience, you know. In fact, at the beginning of every Tantra massage that I give, I have a half an hour where we're just, you know, in our everyday clothes, we connect and we share some of that stuff. I asked, if it's a new client, I'll ask them, you know, what do you already know about Tantra massage? What are you expecting to experience today? Are there any parts of your body that don't feel good that you don't want me to touch? And I check in with that, obviously, during the session itself. So there's no expectation to be touched anywhere in particular. It's just that everywhere's welcome should you wish for that to be the case. And so there's that space, you know. So I manage some of those judgments, preconceptions, fears by just allowing for there to be open dialogue about what the process might be. And obviously reassuring anybody that comes into my space and would like to receive a massage from me that we never go anywhere unless you want to. Super important, you know.
And I think you mentioned it several times, you know, the consent, the continuous consent during those massages and also that permission.
Yeah.
Right. And I think what I sense from you is that also that attunement, you know, the person, like where they are and, you know, what's their boundaries, what is acceptable right now. So I feel like there is so much care in that process. And love.
Yeah, I'm smiling again because attunement is actually, you were using that word. I think that word is a big part of when we practice and we learn to practice Tantra massage. For us, it's around, there you go, you see.
Already a pro.
And yeah, it's like we use that to describe being in tune with where the other person is. So we're not giving, for example, if the person's really like super anxious, we're not going to touch them in a way that elevates energy. We're going to give them some grounding touch, so that attunement of meeting somebody where they're at and offering them touch that best serves their current physical, spiritual, mental, emotional place. And that comes with the experience of doing it, and it comes also with the intuition that's needed to be able to meet clients in that space. And the other thing I wanted to say, sorry, that I forgot, was that not only is like we have this intro chat, but during a massage, because what can happen is your body feels fine, and then like halfway through the massage, your neck aches, or, you discover, actually, I don't really want my breast touched in this massage. They feel sore or sensitive. So we check in as it goes along, like, oh, okay, we have a dialogue. So this is really great for us women as well, because, often we've kind of got used to lying back and taking it and think we just need to receive. And actually, there's something super empowering about naming what you want, need, don't want, or the rest of it. And just this morning, I'm currently training for a diploma in sexological bodywork. And this is closely related to Tantra, and yet still a different thing, which I won't go into in detail here. But one of the massages that I offer as part of this training is called a self-empowerment massage. And what's super special about this is, as its name suggests, the person receiving the massage is actually in control of the massage. So from beginning to end, they tell you how they want to be touched, where they want to be touched, what the touch should be like, when the touch needs to change, the pressure, the speed, everything. And it's, some people some women are like, oh my gosh, that sounds a bit scary, because we're not used to it. But when you do it, my gosh, it is so, so empowering, because you realize, wow, my body does have a lot of information for me. I have way more agency of my physical being than I give myself credit for.
Yeah, not only empowering, I mean, I'm just thinking the level of self-awareness at that moment, knowing exactly that connection with self, like, what is it? How would I want it? At what speed, at what strength, at everything. So, and speaking it out, I think, because we as women, we're not very good, as you mentioned, not very good to asking what we want and what we need. So it really, that's an amazing way of getting into that, and teaching ourselves that. Beautiful.
Yeah. And what I've seen, it really is, and it's about slowing down, as most things are in life, that thing that we know we need to do, and yet we're not always good at doing. And some self-empowerment massages, for example, the one that I did this morning, actually, it tends to be around about an hour or an hour and a half. And the client may only ask you to do 3 or 4 things. It's not like, oh, we've got an hour. You need to come up with like 100 ideas how to touch my body. Sometimes it's just around the client finding that place, and you just stay there with them. And it takes some self-management as a giver, because again, we're used to serving and, seeing what's needed and all the rest. But here, actually, the onus is on the person that you are giving the massage to, actually advocating for their own needs. So the self-management as a giver is, okay, I'm not taking over here. I'm merely listening and adjusting as needed with that person. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I can see the benefit from both sides. That's amazing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm thinking now, Sam? It's like we started with grief.
Yeah.
And we went to pleasure. It's like a circle of life that we're going around. Like how beautiful, how many-faced life is, right?
Yeah, I'm smiling at that too, because for me, it's 2 sides of the same coin. Me and my poetry, I even wrote a poem about that one. And for me, grief, pleasure, you don't have one without the other. Where there's one extreme, there's always another. And that's the beauty of it. And I think where we can get a bit stuck is where we polarize one thing from its opposite, or where we don't include one part, but we just include the other part, or where we resist something because it's not easy or, joyful. And so our work, I feel like, is in including it all, including the sad bits, the difficult bits, the beautiful pleasure moments, and yeah, seeing it all part of life's rich tapestry, as they say.
Hey, you mentioned the poem. Would you like to?
So this poem is called Counterparts. The other side of grief is love beyond all measure. The other side of pain that's deep is pure and total pleasure. The other side of crying is joy in all its forms. The other side of sighing is taking life by storm. The other side of losing is unexpected gain, perspectives for the choosing. We can begin again. The opposites connected, for everything is joined. By both we are affected, two sides of the same coin. From doubting to belief, all held within our hearts. The other side of grief is love that's off the charts.
Beautiful, Sam, and so accurate.
I mean, honestly, when you were speaking, I thought, wow. I mean, it's almost like that had to be read, right? Because it's exactly what you were speaking to.
Well, and what we were both speaking to in terms
Yeah.
of love, all sides of life, all circles of life. Thank you so much. It is so beautiful. And before we close it, one question that always has been with me: how do you find inspiration every day to write poetry?
Yeah. So it's quite simple in a way. I just notice what's around me and how it impacts me. So even if I'm in a box room, not out in nature, and all it has is like, I don't know, a book on the shelf, I'll get curious about that book and how it makes me feel. And I just write about it, and it's really that. And so because of the simplicity of that process, I'm able to write about just about anything. And I let go of, is that poem sounding interesting? Is it sounding intelligent? Am I going to win, the Nobel Peace Prize for poetry? No. But, if my little reflection based on that moment which I observed serves me and then one other person even, there's been a joy in that. And so that's the process.
I love it. And just as a fun fact, I mean, not a fun fact, but really an inspiring fact. So you have written a poem every day for the
Yeah.
last 9 years?
Yeah. 9 years now. Yeah. Yeah. At least one, Magena. I know you have been subjected to many a poetry reading in the years gone by. You have listened with patience and with love. And I really appreciate that.
I've actually really enjoyed them. I really enjoy. And we didn't mention your book. You also
Yes.
have a book, poetry
I
book.
have a book I can show people watching just in case they like poetry. So my book is called The Wild Feminine Spirit, and it's a collection of poetry, as the name would suggest, around the themes of self-love, love. Look, McGenna's got her copy there. You can get it on Amazon. Let's stop the plug now. But yeah, it's basically reflections from my heart captured in a little book. Yeah.
Yes, and it's beautiful. It's really beautiful. So I recommend everyone who enjoys poetry to get a copy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. I've really, really enjoyed this. And I really enjoy, well, who you are, of course, and what you bring, and your big heart, and your enthusiasm, your joy for life, your curiosity, your creativity, everything that makes you you. So I'm deeply, deeply grateful to know you, and that you're one of my friends in life. So thank you for being you.
Thanks, McGenna. Thank you for the safe, warm, easy, fun kind, loving, gentle holding of this conversation. Sometimes you can go on to, a podcast appearance or into a workshop or whatever, and you get those jitters and, am I good enough? And all these feelings that can creep in. And I knew that I could come here today and just be me as I am, and it would be absolutely fine. So thank you for allowing me to be in my spontaneous expression, and love is the message.
Thank you for being with us in the Life's Lessons Lounge. Remember, every story has its wisdom. Join us next time for more insights and inspiration. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep sharing your own story.